Hi everyone, it's Audrey. Hi. I mess this name up every single video. Hi everyone, it's Audrey and welcome back to Chapter and Converse. Today's video is yet another in my Best of 2019 block series of videos that are coming out. And this is my books best of the rest, which basically means not a mystery thriller suspense novel, because those have already been categorized, talked about, celebrated in another video. But this is basically anything else that I read this year that like hit me hard, tugged on a heartstring, spoke to me, caused me to underline it. 7 Ways Till Sunday. These are books that I just loved this year. And there's a couple, I'm looking on the floor, a couple 2019 releases, a lot of backlists, one reread. But books that just sort of like struck me at the right place at the right time kind of a thing. So without any further ado, let's just talk about the books. So the first book I want to talk about is a reread, and it is On Writing by Stephen King. And I actually wound up doing the audiobook of it this year and following along ever so slightly. I have had this book forever. I dog-eared it a ton the first time I read it. I have flipped through it since then. But I was craving some creative inspiration this year, and this is one of the places that I found it. So I have obviously talked about all of these books before, but this is mostly, I hesitate to say, it's a partial craft book, but it's also very much sort of a biography about Stephen King. And he really talks about how his life influenced his writing and vice versa. So there is so much family when he was younger, when he first got married, being a dad, the struggles they went through, sort of how he fit writing into his life no matter what, and sort of woven throughout his personal story are nuggets of writing inspiration. So hands down, if you are a writer or looking for some kind of inspiration, I think this is a great book. I've read a bunch of craft books, and this is definitely one of my favorites. I also think if you're a fan of Stephen King, it is a worthwhile read because it's a very interesting insight into him, again, as a writer, as a son, as a husband, as a father, and just his life. And this book came out a while ago, but it was not long after that horrible accident where he was hit on the side of the road in Maine. This came out in 2000, and he was going for a walk, as he always did, and a car hit him when he was walking. And there was a question of if he was ever going to be able to write again, if he was going to be able to walk again, if he was going to be okay. So it's a very interesting look into Stephen King's life. But another great reread. Loved it. Huge fan of this book, obviously. The next book I wanted to talk about is The Female of the Species by Mindy McGinnis. And this was a book that was recommended by Chelsea from Chelsea Darling Reads. And I read this for one of the Contemporary-a-thons this year. And this is YA, contemporary, hard-hitting, triggers like nobody's business for violence, for sexual violence, for drinking, discussed about but not seen on the page, pedophilia. There is harm to animals in that 2 of the main characters in this book work at an animal shelter, so dogs that have been abused come to them. So our characters are not doing the abuse, but you see the after effects of the abuse. It is 3 teenagers. I want to say they're seniors in a high school. So it's Alex, PK, and bear with me for a minute. I read this a while ago. Of course I'm going to see. It's 3 different perspectives. And Jack. And I read this back in September. And this was a surprising, in good ways, difficult to read in many ways, important book in so many ways, kind of a book that took me by surprise. Did I say this? I listened to the audiobook of this. So it's 3 different perspectives. There's 3 different voices on the audiobook. It's extremely well done. I did follow along at some points here and did reference some things to sort of dog ear and read parts of the book at times. But basically, sort of the line on the back is Alex Kraft knows how to kill someone and she doesn't feel bad about it. So her sister 3 years earlier was murdered and the killer walked free. And this is very much about Alex coping with that and how she deals with that anger and rage. And then she's very much a loner and winds up befriending these two kids in high school, Jack, who becomes her boyfriend, and then PK, which stands for everybody calls her the preacher's kid, so everyone calls her PK, and how they become friends in sort of that last year of high school of them together. So it's interesting, it's dark, it's violent, it's uncomfortable, but it is like loud in a good way and important and meaningful. And I just was really, really surprised by this book. And I wound up doing what I tend to do. I went down a Mindy McGinnis rabbit hole, listened to some podcasts where she was being interviewed, and then came to find out that she had her own podcast called Writer Pants on Fire. So writer hat on. Went very far down that rabbit hole. She's a very interesting writer to me. She is in no way defined by genre. She writes all sorts of different books in all sorts of different genres. This is the only one I have read so far, but I'm very interested to read Heroine, which is another book that she wrote after this, I want to say. So I'm interested in exploring more by her. But this was a pleasant surprise. I do trigger warn everyone. I wrote about it on my Goodreads too, so you can check out my review there. But I found it to be an incredible book that I read this year. On a completely lighter note, I read London is the Best City in America by Laura Dave. And I just finished this in December. And this is one of the main reasons why I don't do best of videos until the end of the year, because you never know where one of your favorite reads are going to come from. And this is a book, I did an entire video about a bunch of books that I had on my shelf, unread, that I've owned for years and years, and in some cases, like easily a decade. And I just keep moving them around and shuffling them around, but never reading them and refusing to unhaul them. And this was one of those books. And I did an entire video on this. I'll link it for you guys in case you're interested. But I'm such a moron. I didn't include this book in it, even though this was the book that inspired me to film that video. But I had pulled it off my shelf to read it, then filmed the video and never talked about this book. But this is contemporary, one of my favorite tropes in the sort of a woman who is a little bit lost in life and trying to figure out kind of what to do next. And Emmy is, she broke up with her fiance a year ago. She did the breaking up, kind of walked out on him. Opening page, no spoilers. And then the sort of that opening prologue is a couple pages long where we find out that she's walked out on her fiance and has been living in Rhode Island. And then a year later, she needs to come back to New York for her brother's wedding. And he is marrying his longtime girlfriend, wedding weekend, the whole extravaganza, the bachelor party, everything is happening that weekend. And the first night she's back in New York, in a suburb of the city, very close to where I grew up, which is another reason why I love this book, and the author is from there, is, Emmy and her brother are sitting down, chit-chatting at the fireworks, and he's kind of like, I think I'm making a huge mistake. I need your help. And they wind up sort of on this journey that weekend of her brother trying to figure out if he should or shouldn't get married. He's feeling very lost. Does he have cold feet? Is there something bigger going on here? And at the same time, it sort of forces Emmy to explore her issues and what she's been hiding from and why she broke up with her fiance, and is she or isn't she over it, and sort of what to do next. So they're both sort of at this very critical part in their life, and it's very much about the brother and sister sort of finding their way with each other. And their parents are there, who I love, and her brother's best friend, and sort of this, and the fiance and her family, and this whole cast of characters. But I just absolutely adored this book. I thought it was funny. I thought it was well written. I thought it was smart. 100% made me cry. Definitely a huge part of why I liked it is because I know this town, and it literally hit home for me, because I could very much see me being Emmy. Had circumstances been different, but I just thought it was great. So I'm excited to explore some more Laura Dave. I want to say this came out in 2006. You can still get this book, obviously. 2006. And I just loved it. It was such a delight. It was such a pleasant surprise. I am so glad. This is why I hesitate to unhaul books, because you just never know where your next best read is going to be. And this was one of mine. Another book that surprised me, that I never would have picked up had it not been for BookTube, that I resisted for no good reason, and I'm so happy that I picked up, is This Adventure Ends by Emma Mills. And Julie from Pages and Pens, this is one of her favorite books. She recommends it. I shouted her out the first time I read it because I'm so grateful to her for having talked about this book. And I wound up picking it up on Book Outlet a long time ago and loved it. That's why it's on this list. And this is a book about a girl named Sloane. She is a senior in high school, and her family moved to Florida for just kind of like right before her senior year. Reasons why are not important to this wrap up here. But she is kind of a loner, you know, new girl, new school, all that kind of stuff. And very quickly is kind of invited into this friend group at school, and they kind of force her to be their friend, so to speak. And it's this twin brother and sister, and then another guy and a girl who they're sort of this like friends, dating, complicated relationships between them all. And there's so many things I love about this book. I love the authenticity to the teenage relationships in this. And this is one of the first YA books I had read this year. Talked about it before, an entire video about my judgmental, nonsensy thoughts about YA stuff. But this is the first YA book that I read this year that really made me feel like, okay, you're missing out on stuff. There is smart, funny, heartfelt stories being written that maybe are targeted towards teens, but that you can relate to, that you can get excited about, that you can feel all the feels for. I cried when I read this book. The relationship between Sloane and her friends is wonderful in all of its authenticity, in sort of how they're thinking. Like, they feel like teenagers, but they don't feel kind of like cookie cutter, clean, squeaky clean teenagers, unrealistic in that way. Like, I feel like this could have been me and my friends in high school. But like how they act, how they speak, their reactions to things, like feels very authentic to me, yet still relatable. So this was not a book that made me feel old. This is a big thing I talked about. Sometimes when I read YA, I feel distinctly and consciously old in it. This was a book where I very much got lost in a story. And the other thing that I loved about it is the relationship between Sloane and her dad. So her dad is a writer, and this might have been another reason, why I loved this book. And he basically is kind of struggling with some massive writer's block, and he is on struggle street like nobody's business. And a huge piece of this book is the relationship between Sloane and her dad, and that chemistry and that banter, and how he sort of finds himself again and sort of help her friends and Sloane help him sort of out of the rut that he's in, if that makes any kind of sense. But the way that I sort of talked about it before is the relationship between Sloane and her dad is my favorite father-daughter relationship since Veronica Mars. This is not a mystery. This is straight up contemporary YA. But it very much reminded me of Keith and Veronica, and I loved it in all the ways that I love Keith and Veronica Mars. So book totally surprised me. I haven't read any other Emma Mills. There's a part of me that wants to just keep it purified and here, but I hugely recommend this book. And again, I'm so grateful to Julie for having talked about it on her channel, because it is the only reason that I ever picked it up and discovered it at all. The next book I completely fell in love with this year is Rachel Hollis's Girls Stop Apologizing. And I did a whole dedicated video to this book. I did a dedicated video to Girl Wash Your Face, her first book. And I listened to the audiobook of this, and I think like 2 hours into listening to the audiobook, I was already ordering this book online and was like going back. I was bookmarking the audiobook on Hoopla, so then I was able to go back and bookmark a bunch of pages here. But what I'm planning to do early in 2020 for that proverbial like kick in the butt, get me going kind of a motivation is to listen to it again and follow along completely in the book so I can mark up all those meaningful passages, because I was just furiously scribbling notes the first time I listened to it. But this is about focusing on your dreams and how to get there, and how to achieve anything and everything that you want to achieve in life. And much like Girl Wash Your Face, this follows sort of a series of short chapters. So in Girl Wash Your Face, it was sort of dispelling all the lies that you tell yourself. And in this book, this is the shame-free plan for embracing and achieving your goals. And she has a few different parts to it. It's the excuses to let go of, the behaviors to adopt, and the skills to acquire. But this isn't like go take an Excel class kind of a thing. But she has 9 excuses. I'm not goal-oriented. I don't have enough time. I'm afraid of failure. What will they think? I can't pursue my dreams and still become a good mom/daughter/employee. And then she has the behaviors to adopt: stop asking for permission, choose a dream and go all in, build a foundation for success, learning to say no. This is just a summary. And then the skills to acquire, which she has: planning, confidence, persistence, effectiveness, positivity. And skill number 6 is lead her ship, for leadership. And then the conclusion: to believe in your dang self. So I just think this was such a great book. I just loved it to pieces, absolutely. I think she's a great life coach. I think she's a great inspiration. She has certainly done a ton in her life, and whether you relate to her or don't relate to her, or want to be what she is in life, or you're just looking to, change jobs or move across the country, or, buy a new home or commit to an exercise program, whatever your thing is, I think there is so much to be gleaned out of this book and gleaned from Rachel herself. So huge fan. Totally can't wait to read it again. Couldn't recommend it more. Just an absolutely great book. And I just slapped my leg really loud, but loved it. So I did an entire reread project in 2019. I had set out to reread 13 books. I wound up rereading 6 of the books on that list and then 3 other books. But one of the books I reread and completely re-fell in love with, and will continue to have a space on my shelf for as long as I shall live, is The Romantics by Gail Niederhofer. The name, Gail Niederhofer, get it. This is another book about a group of friends who went to college together and are reuniting at a wedding of 2 of the people in the group. And this is very reminiscent of my friends and I from college as well. And it is sort of this circle of friends, and there's a huge history between them romantically, friendship-wise. It's complicated. There's a lot of history, there's a lot of backstory, there's a lot of secrets, there's a whole lot going on here. And they are literally together for the weekend, for the wedding. And as you can imagine, all sorts of things come out because there's tons to drink. The rehearsal dinner sort of takes a turn, and it just gets super complicated, but it's so amazing in so many ways. And I just love this book. I hesitate to say anything. I'm like, ugh, what is in the synopsis of this? Okay, so I just checked. So it's basically in the synopsis. But basically, Laura and Lila were college roommates, best of friends. It's about their whole circle of friends. But in college, Laura dated Tom, and now Lila is marrying Tom. So there you go for the complications between all of them. But it's sort of like this slice of life weekend, and it's what goes down with all of these friends. And I just loved it to bits. There is a movie of this with Katie Holmes and Josh Duhamel and Adam Brody, Malin Ackerman from True Blood. God, I'm failing at life. It's so good. It's just so good. So I loved the movie. I loved the book. Read the book first and then watch the movie. But I thought it was a great movie as well. But just so happy I reread it this year because I'm 100% reminded why. This is such a fantastic book. Another nonfiction book, which I've just talked about recently, is Nothing Good Can Come From This by Christy Coulter. And I listened to the audio of this for Nonfiction November and wound up picking up this book on Book Outlet because I wanted to have it in my life. It's not that long. I want to reread it again. But this is a story about Christy Coulter, and she had made a decision to stop drinking. And it is sort of a reflection on life after she stopped drinking and a reflection on the role that alcohol has played in her life since she was a teenager. And it's very interesting observations about not just her life, but society and the role that alcohol sort of plays in the day-to-day. And she talks about, you know, choices she made that she would not have made had she not been drinking, and dangerous situations she had put herself in sometimes, and sort of how it affected everything she did in life, and how it became such a norm for her to, I think she refers to it as sort of like a decades-long feeling of dread and fatigue was really a constant low-grade hangover. So I found this to just be a really interesting commentary on alcohol and drinking, and again, sort of how pervasive it is in our life and how it can affect people. And I didn't find it to be preachy. I didn't find it to be judgmental or scolding or saying like, this is how you need to be or this is what you need to do, but really kind of her self-reflection and some social commentary in it. But I just thought it was great. And I don't know if it was her literal voice that I connected to because she narrates the audiobook, or the content of this, but I thought it was really interesting. I thought it was a really important read, and definitely sort of made me think about things. And I talked about this in my Goodreads review, and I think I talked about this in my November wrap-up too. There were moments that were completely relatable. There were moments that were like a little bit shocking, but at the same time felt not shocking, which maybe made it shocking to me. But just a very authentic, sort of interesting take on things. And I enjoyed her voice and her writing as well. And I think it's just a worthwhile read for anyone. Again, not judgy, not preachy, not anything like that at all, but just a really interesting sort of vignette, slice of life kind of a book. And it's told in a bunch of short little chapters and stories. And I just thought it was, so it says like a life in transition. So it's a bunch of small essays. I just thought it was great. I really did. And again, this is a book that I came across completely randomly on Hoopla. I was looking for a nonfiction that I could listen to. And, you know, I think a lot of the reason why these books are on my list is these are books that completely took me by surprise in great ways, and books that I discovered not by authors I normally would go to, or sort of some of my knee-jerk reaction kind of books that I would pick up, or authors I would pick up. So another pleasant surprise, and a book that I will definitely be reading again. So that's going to do it for the first part of my Best of the Rest video. I 100% plan to make this a one-parter, but as I started to talk about the books and realize how many I had, I also wanted to keep it manageable. So I will pick this up really soon because I've already filmed it, but I will see you guys in my part 2. But let me know if you've read anything from part 1 of this, thoughts on any of these books, or if any of these sound of interest to you. And I will see you guys really shortly in part 2. Bye, everybody.